Welcome to part 7 of our rent-to-own investment series, where we start to take a closer look at how rent-to-own actually works. In the rent-to-own transaction, the investor purchases the home and rents it back to the tenant buyer. But before the investor closes on the property, the tenant buyer provides an option deposit up front. The option deposit serves as security to the investor, but is given by the tenant buyer to reserve the option to buy the property for a predetermined price at the end of their term. With tenant-first rent-to-own, the final purchase price and other terms are agreed upon in advance before the investor buys the home. Before working with a qualified tenant buyer to find a home, we outline the terms of the deal in a pre-approval. This outlines the maximum purchase price, the term, the future option price, the monthly occupancy payment, and how much they will accumulate in the form of option credits. If the terms are acceptable to the tenant buyer, we collect an initial deposit and begin working with them to find a suitable home. The investor then purchases the home to rent to the tenant buyers and receives a higher monthly rent than they would for a regular rental. Each month, a portion of that higher rent accumulates as an option credit to help the tenant buyer build their down payment funds. This means that as the tenant buyer progresses through the rent-to-own term, they have more skin in the game, and the investor has additional security. If the tenant buyer defaults at any point during the term, they lose their initial option deposit and all of their accumulated option credits. On the other hand, as long as the tenant buyer completes the rent-to-own program as intended, they will have both amounts credited towards their future purchase price. At the end of the rent-to-own term, the tenant buyer should be able to qualify for a traditional mortgage and purchase the property for the predetermined price set out in their option agreement. At this point, the investor credits both the option deposit and accumulated option credits towards the purchase price. As an added incentive to pay on time, tenant buyers only earn option credits in each month where rent is received on time. As you can see, rent-to-own sets the tenant buyer up for success and aligns their interests with those of the investor. The strong incentives to complete the rent-to-own transaction provide the investor with additional security while keeping the tenant buyer on track towards their goal of home ownership. With a better understanding of the rent-to-own transaction, we'll start to take a look at the pros and cons of rent-to-own investing in the next 2 sessions.